One of the founding fathers of modern sci-fi is the 1965 book Dune by Frank Herbert. Its influences are far-reaching, including Star Wars, which would go on to become a multi-billion-dollar franchise, whilst attempts to bring Dune to the big screen always ended in disaster. However, despite the book being considered unadaptable, that didn't stop Canadian writer and director Denis Villeneuve trying his hand at finally doing this story justice. So as someone who hasn't read the book and knows absolutely nothing about Dune at all, was this adaptation good, and most importantly, was it accessible? Dune is an absolutely gorgeous movie, one of the visually best looking movies I have ever seen. You could just throw a stone and you would land on a memorable, beautiful shot. Denis Villeneuve directs the film superbly. The locations are distinctive and the location filming is absolutely incredible. It's an ambitious movie and the scale of the direction reflects that. It's not just plonking some actors down in the desert. It has a lot of variations in the setting, and even when they are in the desert, there's a lot of variations within that setting as well. You have the vast open plains, but then you also have the rocky crevasses, so it really gives a sense of detail to this planet. The sound design was amazing and very visceral. It felt like a movie you have to see in the cinema because it was just so loud and powerful. The music and the sound made it incredibly immersive, and I don't think you could get that experience at home. But the intensity of it is a good thing because it makes it very immersive and helps you get invested into everything that's going on. Hans Zimmer delivers a truly memorable, stellar score with so many great Eastern influenced sounds. There's a lot of ambience compared to out and out tracks, but I feel like that makes it a lot better because it adds to the desolate vastness of the setting. I feel like the world building of the movie was simply amazing. People would probably hate this comparison, but I got major Game of Thrones vibes from it. There were so many political machinations and schemes going on. It was very nuanced and multi-layered with character motivations. There's this whole grand empire and we follow a seemingly simple battle between two houses. That's pretty much the plot of the movie. This helps it remain grounded whilst maintaining the vastness of the setting, because it simultaneously feels like a massive intergalactic empire and a simple, relatable story. The threat of the desert itself is also presented really well. The worms are terrifying. You don't even really see one until the end of the movie, so throughout the whole movie you're just impressed by the scale of them because it's always implied. You only ever see the mouth, and that made the worms a really good, silent, constant antagonist because they were always lurking in the background. Whenever any characters were out in the desert, a sandworm could just show up and be a threat. So they're a really good presence throughout the movie. It's a very long movie at 2.5 hours, but even so it felt really well paced. Even in the latter half when it slowed down a lot, I never felt like it dragged in a bad way. Instead it kind of felt like an odyssey. A lot of people have said it's a boring film, but I found it really compelling. It's all really about the characters and the writing rather than all the crazy stuff going on. It's more methodical and slow, like a true sci-fi epic. There's so much going on, but it doesn't try to play to the audience's shorter attention spans. Instead, it takes its time to build this world and this story, so that part 2 can truly reap the rewards of it. But even still, there's a lot of action going on. It really captures you and keeps you on the edge of your seat with what's happening to all these characters. So I feel like a lot of people over-exaggerate the slower pacing of it because there is a lot going on in a good way. There's this one specific big action scene and it feels like a properly big action scene. It could be the climax of a whole movie, but instead it's just the catalyst for this one to begin. The book Dune is considered unadaptable because of its complexity and the length of it, despite actually only being 412 pages long, which is relatively short for a book when you consider how big in scope it is. However, by splitting the narrative into 2 parts, it allows the movie to breathe. It's not trying to cram everything in like the old Dune movie tried doing. Instead of trying to squeeze all this conflict, world building and narrative into one single film, it just takes its time, and I really respect that. I know the book played a big role in inspiring Star Wars, and I feel like that's quite clear when you watch it. If I had to find a way to properly relate it, I'd say it was like all 3 prequels in one movie. It's very much like a specific scene on Revenge of the Sith, and if you know what I'm talking about, you probably instantly connected what I'm talking about. It was such a great scene and it gave me goosebumps, like genuinely. I know people say that, like, oh, the film gave me goosebumps, but this scene genuinely did. I was on the edge of my seat because I had no idea what was going to happen to these characters because, you know, I have no familiarity with them. So the fates of some of them was a shock to me. The last thing I want to touch upon is the casting, which was perfect. This is a star-studded ensemble cast with so many big names. I haven't read the book myself, as I think I've probably made clear throughout this video, but I feel like all the characters were brought to life perfectly by their actors. They all felt realistic and believable, especially Timothée Chalamet as Paul. He is just a young man struggling with the responsibility and the expectations thrust upon him by everyone else in his life. Both his parents want him to go down a certain path, and I like how the film shows that, because he is just a normal person. There's quite a strong critique of the chosen one trope. Obviously, when the book was written, it wasn't as much of a trope as we know it today, but it was still a strong enough of a narrative tool that the writer wanted to make an overt criticism of that. This movie takes that and continues the deconstruction of this heroism. Paul isn't some kind of prince-to-be-promised hero everyone loves because he's destiny. Everyone sees him this way as some kind of chosen one or heir, but he's not really that. He's just Paul. He's just a kid trying to kind of live. He's never been in control of his own life, and you can see that by the way his parents are like, do this, or I want you to try this. So the film is almost like him coming to terms with his identity and making decisions for himself, gaining a lot of independence. Instead of being the white saviour narrative a lot of people have criticised it for being, it's kind of the opposite. The way Paul is written is clearly designed to subvert this idea, because the concept of him being a saviour was something purposefully ingrained into the Freeman culture from outside forces for centuries. The movie isn't about him strolling in and saving these oppressed people, it's just him being a person. And these people have their preconceived ideas about him, and he doesn't necessarily set out to prove them wrong, but he wants them to see him as a person rather than just this object, because that's kind of what it is. All these people are objectifying him as this hero, and they're not wrong to do so because that outside agent put it into their society. But it's just interesting to see how it plays with those expectations of him as a person and as a character, because he represents so many different things to different people and he can't be all those things at the same time. So he has to choose where his allegiances lie, and I just feel like that sets the stage for a really interesting second part. I know all the flashbacks and flash forwards and visions and stuff that he has confused a lot of people, but I thought it was a good way to emphasise all these struggles, because they're a part of him trying to work out his identity. Like, he constantly sees Zendaya's character in his dreams, and he doesn't know what it means the whole time, and he's trying to work it out and piece it together. And I think that helps tie everything together and show how he's slowly progressing from one path to another. So I look forward to see where they take these two characters going forward. I wholeheartedly recommend Dune Part 1. It's an incredible movie, I could find almost no flaws in it. It definitely depends what you go in for. If you go in expecting some kind of Star Wars pulpy thriller, then you probably won't enjoy it. But if you go in and understand it's more like political space stuff, it's so enjoyable. It's very thematic and introspective, and there's a lot going on. It's quite surreal at times, and it makes for a very good viewing experience. I will again emphasise that you probably have to see it at cinema to get the best experience. Watching it at home, you don't have your full attention on it, the sound isn't as good as it could be, you're not getting the proper vastness coming through on your screen, so it's definitely a cinema movie, similar to how Avatar was. But that's not to say it's like Avatar where the narrative is terrible. The narrative is very interesting. It takes a lot of things you expect and know, science fiction tropes, but it subverts a lot of them, and it completely flips the whole chosen one thing on its head. Yes, we have a main character who has certain abilities, but the whole film is about how they shouldn't define him and that he needs to find his own way and his own compromises. It is a long movie, and it can be hard to fully pay attention the whole time. But the characters are perfectly acted, the story beats unravel in the most gratifying possible way, it simultaneously feels like the first half of a narrative and also its own narrative. The climax of the movie is quite low key, and that works really well because it's a big character moment. I feel like it truly shows you how much the original book inspired pretty much all science fiction we know today. Stuff like Star Wars and The Expanse have roots within this book, and the movie shows that with a certain aesthetics it brings out. It's not a movie for everyone, and it can definitely alienate a lot of people, but it's incredibly significant, especially because of how unadaptable the source material is. I find this movie made it a lot more accessible. Yes, there are complaints that it wasn't funny enough, but it isn't supposed to be. It's supposed to be a grand space epic, and if you go in expecting that, you'll be satisfied. If you go in kind of expecting anything else, you'll probably not have a great time, but I feel like the sheer visuals of it can carry it alone. So yeah, that's my kind of rambly thoughts about Dune. I definitely recommend going and seeing it. I would give it probably an A-star ranking. It was one of the best movies I've ever seen, if not for the narrative, just for the beauty of it, because it's such a good looking and sounding movie. So yeah, that's all for now, and I will see you in the next video. Bye bye. And I'd like to give an extra special thank you to my diamond level patron Fallon Cortez, and all my gold level patrons: Alex Marston, Basil Disco PhD, Calvin, Daniel Shillito, Francois aka Line Vortex, George, Sion Wagner, and Stefan Never Miller. Thank you so much for your support.